If you drink too much cranberry juice to try to get rid of a UTI, you'll probably end up with a yeast infection from all the sugar. So that's not what I'm recommending. Cranberry extract is an herbal remedy, but there are other things that I use, but this is a totally natural substance and it will help to whiten your teeth as well. They had never seen anyone not bruise, and I had no bruising at all. It also really sped up the healing process. Hey, I'm Dr. Gayla. I'm an acupuncturist, naturopath, and author, and I am trained to help you use natural remedies and alternative therapies to restore your well-being. And I turn to one of my tried and true remedies that I use when I feel some sort of urinary tract infection coming on. That's what happened yesterday. I felt that escalating sense of burning, stinging, urinary urgency, and just the pressure, and it was extremely uncomfortable. Sometimes even for myself, I'll let it get a little out of hand before it dawns on me that I know what to do about it. Once I had the revelation that I had a remedy on hand, I went to my cabinet and I grabbed my CranActin. Now, this should not be confused with those people who say to drink cranberry juice if you have a urinary tract infection, a UTI, because cranberry juice can actually make matters worse. There's way too much sugar in cranberry juice, not to mention the fact that it tastes horrendous if it doesn't come in some sort of cranberry juice cocktail version. So if you drink too much cranberry juice to try to get rid of a UTI, you'll probably end up with a yeast infection from all the sugar. So that's not what I'm recommending. There is a capsule version of CranActin. I take a therapeutic dose of that. Yesterday, I took double the dose several times, and I will tell you that within 2 hours of the first dose, I started to feel relief. Today, it's probably down to 10%, and maybe even lower than that. I probably wouldn't even know that that was what was going on if I hadn't had such an extreme experience yesterday. I want to share one of my success stories with CranActin. Certainly, I've used it with myself a number of times in the last 20, 30 years. I had a beloved Westie, and this would have been 20 plus years ago now, the story I'm sharing with you. But my Westie and I had moved to Colorado, and we were living in a place for the first time where he couldn't go outside constantly. Normally we had lived somewhere where he had a dog door and he could go in and out as he pleased, and now he had to ask me to go outside. He was used to peeing a little trickle here and a trickle there because that's what male dogs do. Now he couldn't do that, and I assume that he had just had to hold his bladder too long. He also may have eaten something that he wasn't used to, but there was obviously something wrong with him. I had no idea what it was. He was still eating, but he just was not acting normally. He and I had been constant companions for many years, so I knew when he wasn't acting normally. So I took him to the vet, and again, we were in a new location. I had to take him to a new vet, and the vet looked him over and even on the second visit did a urine test to see if he had a bladder infection. They said that was not the case. So I've been to the vet twice now. He's getting worse. I called my vet back where we had moved from, who had been Duncan's vet from when he was a puppy. I said, "Doc, there's something really wrong with Duncan, and I've taken him to the vet twice. They can't figure it out." He had gone to school actually in Colorado, so he had a lot of contacts there. He encouraged me to take him to the emergency clinic. It was New Year's weekend, and he encouraged me to take him to the emergency clinic in Denver, which I did. I had to leave him, and I guess it was the next day, I got a follow-up, and they had run extensive tests and had determined that he had in fact had a bladder infection, and it had gone undetected for so long that it had turned into a systemic infection that was threatening his spine. They put him on, and I brought him home with antibiotics and an at-home care program. So if you have read my story, you know that by this point, for me to put myself or any being that I love on antibiotics is pretty much of an extreme measure. But at this point, I knew we weren't messing around. He was better within a few days. It cost me over $1,000 to have him in the emergency clinic in Denver for a couple of days, and that was over 20 years ago. But what happened is within a couple of weeks, I started to see the signs coming back. Obviously, this was going to be a chronic infection, and I could not put him on antibiotics off and on nonstop. That was just going to make matters worse in the long run. I knew what I used for my own bladder infection, and I thought, okay, we can try it. I just broke a capsule open and gave him a portion of a capsule, and within a matter of hours, he was obviously better. Anytime he showed those signs, which now I knew what those signs were pointing to, I just put him on the CranActin and it knocked it right out. This is one of those examples of how I use holistic treatment and alternative remedies, particularly herbs in this case, to deal with any sort of chronic, but especially chronic intermittent kind of health issues. You've got to have these things on hand because when the need arises, it's really easy for them to escalate to the point where it's harder for some sort of natural remedy to reverse it. In this particular case, that was an herbal remedy. Cranberry extract is an herbal remedy, but there are other things that I use, essential oils being one of them. My main essential oil that I always have on hand is tea tree oil. Any sort of skin issue will be made better with tea tree oil. I can just pretty much assure you of that. So if you see any sort of skin irritation, just dab a little bit of tea tree oil on it. If you've got really sensitive skin, you may need to dilute it. I don't have a problem with it, but you need really high quality tea tree oil on hand at all times. One of the other things that I just could not be without is food grade hydrogen peroxide. My parents had been told many, many years ago by a dentist to swoosh with hydrogen peroxide to help heal your gums. I thought that was a little weird and tasted terrible. They also brushed their teeth with baking soda, which was also awful. So I never had really practiced it myself, but at a certain point I discovered food grade hydrogen peroxide. This was really interesting because it was a higher quality remedy, if you will, and it can be diluted to different strengths depending on what you need to use it for. So I buy it by the big jug and I dilute it with distilled water depending on what sort of strength I need. But I use food grade hydrogen peroxide as a rinse every evening before I go to bed. The really cool thing is it's also a natural whitener. So no more of those chemical bleaches in your mouth. Your mouth is directly related to all of your internal systems and your bloodstream. So be very careful what you put in your mouth. But this is a totally natural substance and it will help to whiten your teeth as well. Now I use hydrogen peroxide for lots of purposes, but the most important thing is just to have it on hand when you need it. It's going to be too late if you have to order it and even wait just a day or two. You need to have it on hand and ready now. Another natural remedy that I always have on hand is a homeopathic called arnica. You can use topically in a cream, or it comes in little pellets that are tasteless and you dissolve them under the tongue typically. Arnica is fantastic for pain and bruising. I had an eye surgery in 1997. It was a voluntary eye surgery because I was already practicing alternative holistic medicine, just primarily in my own personal life. I put together a protocol. Part of that protocol included using arnica and treating with it several days in advance because it works best, especially for bruising, if you start the protocol a few days before the event that's going to take place. The doctor said that they had never seen anyone not bruise, and I had no bruising at all. It also really sped up the healing process and lessened the pain associated with this particular protocol that I had. Arnica is another one of those things you definitely want to have on hand. You want to have it in cream form and pellet form. And if you have any sort of injury that you think is going to bruise, start taking it immediately. Again, better if you can take it in advance, but if you can't take it in advance, take it immediately. And then last but not least today, I want to see if I can help all those millions of people who regularly have some sort of breakout from a chronic infection like herpes. You can take lysine proactively, meaning that if you are regularly having breakouts, you probably want to take lysine regularly. But if you just feel that tingle coming on and you know that's probably where it's going to lead, start taking lysine. Again, take a therapeutic dose for the first day or two and it will probably knock it out. You can also use tea tree oil topically, and that will heal the skin eruption very quickly. Those are just a handful of my go-to remedies that I use really on a regular basis. I haven't had a UTI in a year, but boy was I glad to have the CranActin in my cabinet yesterday. Just let me know if you have other remedies that you use on a regular basis for your home health care.